Professor Catherine Ashford's laughter cut through the lecture hall like shattered glass. "An impossible blueprint," she announced, holding up my thesis design between two fingers. "That's what you've presented to this committee, Miss Thorne. A structure that defies every principle of modern engineering." 200 students watched from the gallery above. This was Ashford Academy's graduate thesis defense. The moment where final-year students presented their projects to faculty and peers. Public. Brutal. Career-defining. And I was being massacred. The cantilevered sections alone would collapse under their own weight, Professor Ashford continued, circling my architectural model like a predator. 3 months of work sat on that table, every detail precisely scaled, every calculation verified dozens of times. The load distribution is fantastical, and this central spire, she tapped it with one manicured nail. This violates 3 building codes and possibly 5 laws of physics. My throat tightened. I'd spent 3 years developing this design. A cathedral that seemed to float, its weight distributed through hidden supports calculated to microscopic precision. Revolutionary, elegant, perfect, and she was destroying it in front of everyone. "Professor, if you'd examine the calculations in Appendix C," my voice trembled with barely controlled desperation. "I've examined your calculations, Miss Thorne," she interrupted without looking at the document I extended. "They're based on theoretical frameworks that don't exist in any accredited engineering manual. You've invented your own mathematics to justify an impossible structure." She smiled coldly. "This is architecture, not fantasy fiction. We deal in reality here, not fevered dreams." Nervous laughter rippled through the gallery. My face burned. "Your grandfather," Professor Ashford said, her tone shifting to false sympathy, "was also prone to ambitious imagination. I suppose creativity runs in families, as does impracticality." My hands clenched into fists. She knew about my grandfather. Everyone in the department knew I was Thomas Thorne's granddaughter, but no one had ever weaponized it against me before. My grandfather was a brilliant architect, was expelled from this very institution for presenting similarly impossible work, she finished, in 1965, for designs that violated structural integrity standards, for endangering students with reckless experimentation. She set my model down carelessly. Something in the spire shifted. History repeats itself, particularly in families that refuse to learn from mistakes. The room fell silent. Every eye on me, every face reflecting pity and secondhand embarrassment. I wanted to disappear, to run and never return. Instead, I twisted the ring on my finger, the heavy silver band my grandfather had given me before he died. The one with the intricate crest, a compass rose surrounded by 7 stars. Just a nervous habit, a self-soothing gesture. But when Professor Ashford's gaze fell on that ring, her entire demeanor changed. The condescension vanished. Color drained from her face. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again without sound. And for just a moment, I saw something I never expected in Catherine Ashford's eyes. Raw, undiluted fear. "Where?" Her voice cracked. "Where did you get that ring?" I looked down at it, confused. "My grandfather gave it to me, before he died." "What was his name?" The question came out sharp, violent. "Thomas Thorne. He studied here in the 1960s. Professor Ashford stepped backward as if I'd struck her. Papers fell from her hands, scattering across the floor. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Professor?" Dean Warren stood from the faculty panel. "Is something wrong?" Catherine Ashford didn't answer. Her eyes remained locked on my ring like it was a weapon pointed at her heart. "This defense is over," she announced abruptly. "Miss Thorne, you're dismissed. The committee will deliberate and notify you within 7 days." "But I haven't finished presenting." "You're dismissed." Steele rapped in panic. "Leave. Now. The room erupted in confused whispers. Dean Warren tried to restore order, but Professor Ashford was already walking toward the exit, heels clicking like gunshots, each step faster than the last. She was running away. From me. From my ring. From something I didn't understand. I stood there, my impossible blueprint rejected, my future uncertain, and a ring I'd worn for 5 years suddenly feeling like it carried secrets I'd never imagined. My grandfather died when I was 23. Thomas Thorne had been a quiet man who lived in a converted warehouse workshop, surrounded by architectural models that seemed to defy physics. Bridges that curved like frozen music. Buildings that appeared to grow from the earth. Cathedrals with spires at impossible angles. "They're beautiful," I'd told him once, running my fingers over a spiraling tower model. "They're possible," he'd corrected gently. "The world just isn't ready to believe it yet." People confuse unprecedented with impossible. They're not the same thing. He'd been an architect, brilliant but obscure. Most of his work remained unbuilt. The few structures he'd completed had been demolished or lost to time. "What happened to them?" I'd asked. His smile grew sad. "The same thing that happens to all ideas that threaten the comfortable order of things. They're erased. By people who prefer the world unchanged. When the cancer took him, he left me 3 things: his workshop, his blueprints, and the ring. This belonged to the 7, he'd told me from his hospital bed, pressing the silver band into my palm with surprising strength. We were architects who believed buildings could be more than shelter. They could be art, science, philosophy, all woven together. The 7? A secret society, formed at Ashford Academy in 1962. His eyes grew distant. 7 students who created designs that would have changed the world, and we were destroyed for it. By who? By people who confused power with correctness. He squeezed my hand. "Wear this ring, Evelyn, and when the time comes, remember, the impossible is only impossible until someone proves otherwise." 3 weeks later, he was gone. I'd worn the ring every day since, thinking it was just a keepsake. A reminder of the man who'd taught me that buildings could sing. I'd never imagined it was evidence of something dangerous. After the disastrous defense, I went straight to the library archives. If Professor Ashford recognized the ring, that meant she knew about the 7, which meant there were records. I searched for hours. Found nothing at first. No mention of the 7 anywhere. Then I noticed something strange in the 1965 graduation records. 7 students listed as withdrawn for academic violations. No details. Just names and one notation: membership in unauthorized organization. The first name, Thomas Edward Thorne. The second, Richard Allen Ashford. My heart stopped. Ashford, like Catherine Ashford. I pulled up the faculty genealogy database. Richard Allen Ashford, class of 1965, withdrawn. Father of Catherine Margaret Ashford, current professor of structural engineering. Her father had been in the 7, with my grandfather. I kept searching. Found a photograph in digitized newspaper archives from October 1964. 7 students standing in front of an impossible building, all wearing rings identical to mine. The caption: Ashford Academy students unveil revolutionary design. Critics call it impossible. The article praised them, called them visionaries, said their design would redefine modern architecture. 6 months later, another article. Student society disbanded after safety violations. 7 members expelled. No details. No evidence. Just accusations that their designs were structurally unsound and dangerously experimental. The 7 had been erased from history, but my grandfather kept his ring, kept his blueprints, kept the truth. And Professor Catherine Ashford, whose father had been part of the 7, just saw me wearing evidence that everything buried 60 years ago was about to resurface. No wonder she'd looked terrified. The email arrived at midnight. Miss Thorne, my office. 8 a.m. tomorrow. Come alone. Do not bring the ring. This is not a request. Professor K. Ashford. I stared at the screen, reading it 3 times. She wanted to control the conversation, make sure no one else saw the ring before she could explain it away. I wrote back, I'll be there at 8, with the ring. Her response came within seconds. That would be extremely unwise. Then I guess I'm unwise. See you at 8. No response after that. I didn't sleep. Professor Ashford's office was pristine. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, walls lined with awards and published papers. She stood by the window when I entered, back to me. Close the door, she said without turning. I did. The ring felt heavy on my finger. My father spoke of Thomas Thorne often, she said quietly. Called him the most brilliant architect he'd ever known. Also called him the most dangerous. Dangerous how? She finally turned. In the morning light, she looked older, tired. Dangerous, because he refused to accept limitations, because he inspired others to take risks that could have killed them. My grandfather's designs weren't dangerous. They were advanced. They were reckless. Her voice hardened. Thomas and his society nearly destroyed this institution. Their revolutionary designs endangered everyone. That's a lie. The words escaped before I could stop them. Professor Ashford's jaw tightened. Excuse me? I spent last night in the archives. Found newspaper articles from 1964 praising the Seven's work. Engineering reviews confirming their calculations were sound. There's no evidence of danger. Just accusations after their work got recognition. You don't know what you're talking about. Then tell me. I held up my hand, the ring catching light. Tell me why you looked at this ring like it would destroy you. For a long moment, silence. Then she walked to her desk, unlocked a drawer, and pulled out a box. Inside, a ring identical to mine. My father gave this to me before he died, she said quietly, lifting it carefully. Made me promise 3 things. Never wear it, never speak of the 7, never acknowledge what they'd created. Why? Because the truth would ruin everything he built afterward. She set the ring on her desk. After the expulsion, my father spent 40 years rebuilding his reputation. Changed his name. Richard Ashford became Richard Sterling. Started over. Became one of the most respected engineers in the Northwest. She touched the ring gently. All of it built on the story that the 7 were dangerous amateurs. That their designs were flawed. That their expulsion was justified. But it wasn't true. No, she admitted quietly. It wasn't. She opened her laptop, turned the screen toward me. Files, hundreds of them. Blueprints I recognized. 3 years ago, I found my father's archived work, she continued. Everything the 7 created. I had it independently analyzed by structural engineers who didn't know the history. Asked for professional assessment. She pulled up a document. Formal engineering reviews. The verdict was unanimous, she said. Revolutionary, structurally sound, completely viable, in some cases more advanced than current practices. I stared at the validation my grandfather never received. They weren't expelled because their work was dangerous, Professor Ashford said. They were expelled because it threatened the construction firms funding this academy, because innovation disrupted profit margins, because institutions valued money over truth. Then why didn't you expose this? Clear their names? Because it would mean admitting my father participated in academic fraud. She closed the laptop. It would reveal that Richard Sterling, respected engineer, beloved mentor, was actually Richard Ashford, who betrayed his colleagues to save himself. He testified against them. Claimed their work was dangerous when he knew it wasn't. supported false accusations in exchange for a faculty recommendation under his new name. She met my eyes. He traded his integrity for survival. And you've been protecting that lie. I've been protecting an institution that educates thousands, protecting my father's genuine later contributions, protecting careers of people who studied under him. She gestured to the window. Exposing the truth would damage all of that. And that's more important than justice. That's the mathematics of responsibility, she said. 7 people wronged 60 years ago. Thousands benefit today. What's the ethical answer? I looked at my grandfather's ring. The answer is that truth doesn't have a cost-benefit analysis. I pulled out my phone, opened the files I'd uploaded, everything from the archives. What are you doing? Her voice rose. Finishing what my grandfather started. My thumb hovered over send. You'll destroy your academic career, she said desperately. I can make sure you never work in architecture. I don't care. And I meant it. My grandfather spent his life being erased, being told his work was impossible, being punished for being right. I looked at her. He told me, the impossible is only impossible until someone proves otherwise. That's what the 7 tried to do, and you've hidden proof they succeeded. Please think about everyone who'll be hurt. Everyone who'll finally know the truth. I pressed send. Files uploaded. Blueprints, articles, photographs, analyses, sent to 60 different addresses. Professor Ashford sank into her chair as if her legs had failed. You just destroyed everything, she whispered. No, I said, walking to the door. I stopped letting lies protect themselves. I paused at the door. My grandfather wore this ring for 60 years, even when it cost him everything. Because some truths matter more than consequences. I left her there in her perfect office surrounded by awards built on lies. By noon, campus was chaos. The files spread like wildfire. Students gathered everywhere, reading the documents. Faculty held emergency meetings. The student newspaper published Hidden History, The Secret Society, Ashford Academy Erased. My phone exploded with messages. Emails from students, journals, historians, documentary crews. The Academy's response came at 2 p.m., a carefully worded statement calling for calm consideration and promising thorough investigation. Bureaucratic cowardice disguised as due process. But something else was happening. People were believing me. Architecture professors from other universities analyzed the 7's designs, confirming the engineering was sound. Trade publications ran articles about lost innovations. Students organized protests demanding transparency. Professor Martinez sent me a message. What you did took extraordinary courage. My office is open. I sat in an off-campus coffee shop watching my future implode and felt strangely calm. Then a shadow fell across my table. An elderly man stood there, probably mid-80s, with silver hair and sharp eyes. On his hand, a ring, the 7-star crest, identical to mine. May I sit? He asked. I nodded, unable to speak. He settled carefully into the booth. My name is David Chen. I was a member of the 7, one of 3 still living. My heart hammered. You knew my grandfather. Thomas was my closest friend. His eyes grew distant. We designed 4 structures together at the academy, all still standing, functioning exactly as calculated. We weren't reckless, Miss Thorne. We were methodical. We proved everything we proposed. Then what happened? We threatened the wrong people with the right ideas. He pulled out his phone, showed me a photograph of a beautiful building with organic curves. This was our senior thesis, a community center that generated its own power, purified water, regulated temperature through passive systems, cost 40% less than conventional structures, operated at near zero environmental impact. He swiped to another photo. We presented it to the trustees in March 1965. They were impressed. So impressed they contacted major construction firms, Grandstone, Meridian, Titan Forge, suggesting partnership. The firms weren't interested. They were very interested in making sure our work never got implemented. He set his phone down. Within a week, those firms sent a joint letter. Support the Seven's research and lose $15 million in annual funding. The trustees held an emergency session, and our faculty advisor, Richard Ashford. David's expression hardened. Richard supervised every phase of construction, signed off on every calculation. He knew our work was sound. But he lied. Claimed we'd ignored his safety warnings, testified our structure had critical flaws. Based on his testimony, we were expelled. Our community center was demolished within days. Why didn't you fight? We tried. We had documentation proving Richard approved everything. But we were students. He was respected faculty. The academy believed him. Or found it convenient to believe him since believing us meant losing $15 million. He looked at me directly. Richard got tenure at another school under a new name within months. The rest of us were blacklisted. Took decades to rebuild careers, usually under different names. And my grandfather? Thomas refused to hide, kept designing, kept building whatever he could. Never compromised. David smiled sadly. He paid for that integrity with permanent obscurity. I touched my ring. He told me to finish what the Seven started. I know. He said if he had a granddaughter interested in architecture, he'd give her his ring. He covered my hand gently. What you did this morning, releasing those files, that's the courage we lacked. We stayed silent to survive. You spoke truth, risking everything. I might have destroyed my career. Or proved you're the architect your grandfather knew you'd become, the kind who understands buildings are moral statements. He stood slowly. There's going to be a reckoning here. Some will be angry, but others will recognize what you've done. What if people say it doesn't matter anymore? Then keep building anyway. Keep proving the impossible is just not yet. That's what Thomas did. That's what architects should do. He walked away, and I sat thinking about legacy and courage. The disciplinary hearing was scheduled for Thursday. By Wednesday, it had become a media event. The story went viral. Documentary crews arrived. Alumni demanded answers. Architecture firms distanced themselves from their predecessors' regrettable actions. The hearing room held 20 people comfortably. Over 150 tried to get inside. Students wearing 7 Crest shirts. Faculty who believed truth mattered. Journalists and elderly individuals wearing 7-star rings. Members of the Seven and descendants, gathering publicly for the first time in 60 years. And Professor Ashford, sitting alone in front, looking 10 years older. Dean Warren called the hearing to order. Miss Thorne, you're here to answer charges of unauthorized disclosure. Those materials were public record, Professor Martinez interrupted from the back. He stood. The archives Miss Thorne accessed were all publicly available. She disclosed nothing confidential. She compiled information that was deliberately obscured. Nevertheless, her actions created disruption, Dean Warren started. Her actions exposed institutional fraud this academy hid for 6 decades. David Chen stood, and the room fell silent. My name is David Chen, one of the 7, one of 3 still living. His voice carried authority. Thomas Thorne was my dearest friend. We built 4 structures together, all still standing, all functioning exactly as designed. We weren't reckless. We were visionaries who proved our methods worked. He showed photographs on the screen. This Portland Community Center, still operating after 59 years, still one of the most energy-efficient buildings in the state. This Vancouver housing, still home to 200 families. This Seattle Center won multiple sustainability awards. He looked at Dean Warren. We weren't expelled because our work was dangerous. We were expelled because it threatened construction firms funding this institution. Another person stood, a woman in her 70s. Sarah Okoye, also one of the 7. Her voice was strong. I've spent 60 years trying to forget what this academy did, trying to move past injustice. But watching this young woman risk everything to tell our story reminded me that silence isn't healing, it's complicity. She pulled out a folder. I've brought documentation. Letters from construction executives threatening funding. Meeting minutes showing trustees voting to expel us for financial reasons. Engineering reports proving our work was sound. One by one, others stood. Former team members, descendants, current students, each adding their voice. And Professor Ashford sat silent through it all, head bowed. Until Dean Warren looked at her directly. Professor Ashford, your father was involved. Do you have anything to add? She stood slowly. My father was Richard Ashford, one of the 7, someone who helped create revolutionary work and then betrayed his colleagues to save himself. She pulled out her father's ring, held it up. I've known the truth for 3 years. Found his archived work, had it analyzed, confirmed the 7 were geniuses destroyed by institutional cowardice and corporate greed. Her voice grew stronger. And I did nothing. Protected the lie because exposing it would damage my career, my father's legacy, this academy's reputation. I chose comfortable dishonesty over difficult truth. She looked at me. Until Miss Thorne forced me to confront what I was protecting. Forced this institution to acknowledge its fraud. She set the ring on the table. I'm resigning immediately. What happened in 1965 was fraud. What I did by hiding evidence was continuation of that fraud. I'm done participating. She approached me. Your grandfather would be proud. You had the courage we lacked. She extended her hand. After a moment, I shook it. Professor Ashford walked out of her career, out of the lie she'd protected. The room erupted, but I thought about my grandfather's voice. The impossible is only impossible until someone proves otherwise. The Board of Trustees convened emergency session 3 days later. David Chen, Sarah Okoye, and Marcus Wade, the 3 surviving 7 members, were invited to testify. So was I. The boardroom was old money elegant. 12 trustees sat in judgment, expressions ranging from uncomfortable to hostile. Board Chair Margaret Whitmore spoke first. We've reviewed the materials. While the historical record is concerning, we need full context. The context, David said sharply, is that your predecessors took bribes from construction companies to destroy 7 students whose work threatened profit margins. That's a serious accusation. It's documented. Sarah slid a folder across the table. Financial records showing payments from Grandstone, Meridian, and Titan Forge to 3 board members in 1965. Meeting minutes discussing the 7 problem. Testimony from construction executives admitting they viewed our work as existential threat. She opened the folder, revealing pages of evidence. Your institution actively collaborated in our destruction, Sarah continued. A younger trustee leaned forward. If the 7's designs were revolutionary, why weren't they vindicated over time? Why didn't other architects adopt their methods? Marcus Wade smiled grimly. Because we were systematically erased. Every firm we approached was contacted, warning we were dangerous liabilities. Every patent we filed was challenged. Every structure we designed was denied permits. He pulled out documents. I have rejection letters from 43 firms, denial notices for 17 patents, building permit refusals for 29 projects, everyone citing our history of safety violations that never existed. But some buildings were constructed, the trustee said. 4 buildings, David answered, built under pseudonyms, through shell corporations we created to hide our involvement, funded by private individuals who believed in our work despite the smear campaign. That Portland concert hall? Mine, under a different name. Seattle's Vertical Garden Complex? Sarah's design. Vancouver's Suspended Library? Marcus's. The San Francisco Cathedral? That's Thomas's masterpiece, built as Thomas Wells. Sarah nodded. All still standing after 60 years, all award-winning, all proof our techniques weren't reckless, just threatening to established interests. She spread photographs across the table. Silence as trustees examined the evidence. Finally, Margaret Whitmore spoke. "What do you want?" "Recognition," David said. "Official reinstatement of our degrees, public acknowledgement of what was done, and a formal apology to Thomas Thorne's granddaughter, who had the courage we lacked." All eyes turned to me. "I don't need an apology," I said, standing. "I need this academy to stop destroying visionaries to protect donors." "Miss Thorne." My thesis was rejected not because it was flawed, but because it challenged established methods, just like my grandfather's work, just like the 7. I gestured to the elderly architects. These people weren't reckless. They were revolutionary. They threatened profitable paradigms, and your predecessors chose profit over innovation. I held up my grandfather's ring. He wore this for 60 years, even when it cost him everything, because he believed some truths are worth fighting for. I looked around the room. You can keep protecting lies, keep destroying students who threaten comfortable narratives, keep choosing reputation over reality. I turned toward the door. Or you can finally prove you've learned something in 60 years. I walked out. Behind me, Margaret Whitmore said quietly, "We'll have a decision within 72 hours." The Academy's statement came 60 hours later. I was in my grandfather's workshop when the email arrived. The board acknowledges historical institutional failures regarding 7 students expelled in 1965. After thorough review, the board confirms expulsions were not based on legitimate safety concerns, but resulted from external corporate pressure. Degrees of all 7 students are reinstated retroactively. The Academy formally apologizes and establishes the Thorne Chen Okoye Fellowship for Innovative Architectural Research. Not perfect, carefully worded to minimize liability, but explicit enough. The Academy admitted it had been wrong. My phone rang. David Chen. "Have you seen it?" "Just read it. It's not enough. Never enough to give us back 60 years. But it's something." His voice shook with emotion. "Finally, after all this time. My grandfather would be proud." "Thomas would be proud of you," David corrected. "You did what we were too afraid to do. I got to honor him. That's worth everything. You sound just like him. That same stubborn idealism." David's voice softened. "There's going to be a ceremony next month. The Academy wants to officially confer our degrees, create an exhibit, dedicate a building. Will you come? Try to stop me." But the real victory wasn't the Academy's statement. It was what happened next. Architecture firms reached out about 7 methodologies. Universities requested access to blueprints. A foundation expressed interest in funding construction using the suppressed techniques. Applications to Ashford's architecture program increased 40%, students citing the 7's story as inspiration. The culture began shifting. Faculty encouraged unconventional approaches. Projects became more daring. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to matter. And in my grandfather's workshop, I began working on something new. Not my rejected thesis, something bigger. A structure proving, once and for all, that impossible was just another word for not yet. The foundation grant came 8 months after I released the 7's files. $10 million to construct a building using the revolutionary techniques my grandfather and his colleagues developed 60 years ago. Proof their methodologies weren't just theoretical, but practically implementable. I accepted on condition that David Chen, Sarah Okoye, and Marcus Wade serve as senior consultants, that the Seven's names appear on every blueprint, that the building become permanent testament to visionaries who refuse to accept impossible as answer. The foundation agreed to everything. 2 years later, I stood in a Northern California field watching construction crews break ground on a cathedral that defied comfortable assumptions about what buildings should be. David Chen stood beside me, now 86, holding original blueprints my grandfather had drawn in 1964. Paper yellowed with age, ink faded, but vision clear and revolutionary. "Thomas would have loved this," he said quietly. "He knew it would happen." "Did he?" "He gave me the ring, taught me the designs, prepared me for this." I looked at the old architect. He just couldn't see it himself. David smiled. Visionaries see the future so clearly, they forget they're living in the present. Sarah Okoye approached, moving with determined energy despite her cane. The foundation approved funding for 3 more structures using 7 methodologies. They want you to lead design on all of them. "All 3? You've earned it." She tapped my hand where I wore my grandfather's ring. "That crest means something again. Means what it always should have. That impossible is just another word for not yet." The cathedral took 4 years to build. Critics said it would collapse. Engineers claimed the mathematics were unsound. Inspectors tried to halt construction. But every calculation held. Every support bore exactly its load. Every impossible angle stayed where designed. When it opened, people traveled worldwide to see it. Not just because it was beautiful, though it was, breathtakingly, but because it existed. Because it proved 7 students expelled in 1965 had been right all along. The dedication ceremony was held on a perfect autumn morning. 500 people attended. Architects, students, journalists, and elderly individuals wearing silver rings with 7 stars. Members of the 7 and descendants gathered to witness what their courage created. Dean Warren spoke about learning from history. David Chen talked about friendship and perseverance. Sarah Okoye discussed the difference between innovation and recklessness. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium wearing my grandfather's ring, carrying the blueprint he'd drawn 6 decades ago. The same design, refined and realized, now standing 300 feet tall behind me. My grandfather told me the impossible is only impossible until someone proves otherwise. I began. He spent his life proving, and spent his life being punished for it. I looked at the crowd. The 7 weren't destroyed because they were wrong. They were destroyed because being right was inconvenient, because innovation threatened profit, because changing the world meant challenging people who preferred it unchanged. I held up my hand, ring catching sunlight. But truth doesn't disappear when you bury it. It waits. In blueprints hidden in workshops. In rings passed from grandfather to granddaughter. In students brave enough to ask why impossibility is always defined by people who benefit from limitations. The crowd was silent. Professor Ashford laughed at my blueprint, called it impossible, called it fantasy. I smiled. She was wrong. Not about the design, it was radical, unprecedented, but about what impossible means. Impossible doesn't mean it can't be done. It means it hasn't been done yet. It means someone has to be brave enough to try first. I looked at David, Sarah, Marcus, the elderly architects wearing rings. These 7 people were brave enough 60 years ago. They paid with their careers.